Hey guys, welcome back for another exciting episode. I'm joined by Professor Nikolai Petrovsky for another exciting episode. It's been a while, but it's good to have you here. How's everything going?
It's good to be back, George.
Yeah.
And lots of things have happened since we last talked, so it's a good time, I think, to have a chat and a bit of an update on where things are at in all things COVID. Maybe talk a little bit about, the bird flu and the fact we're losing a lot of native wildlife already in South Australia.
Really? I had no idea. Oh, here in SA, really?
Yeah, we just reported last night. I think 1,000 dead birds have been found on a couple of the South Australian islands. There's an infected penguin, and of course we've had an outbreak in penguins in Tasmania.
So it's not connected to the Yagi situation, or just
no, not directly. This is bird flu.
Okay,
this is,
so just
always been out there. It's now arrived in Australia, and it's clearly out of control, and not much that currently can be done about it.
Are people's pet birds at threat to this bird flu?
Everything is at risk. Everything. What we know is because the same strain of bird flu that's hitting Australia right now has been causing problems in South America now for over a year.
Wow.
So it's wiped out a lot of bird populations, seal populations.
Seals as well?
Very lethal to seals.
So this is a mammal kind of style,
obviously seals are mammals, and that's obviously the big concern with bird flu. Is it's highly lethal to a lot of birds.
Yeah.
Not all birds, it's species specific. So it picks off particular strains of bird.
Yeah.
But it has the potential to cross to mammals.
Yeah.
Now, the big concern with this strain of bird flu is it's not just killing wild birds, it's killing a lot of wild seals.
Yeah, that's strange.
And seals are not fish, they're mammals.
Yeah, they're mammals, yeah.
So that means this virus, and I think they did a drone flyover of Heard Island, which is one of Australia's Antarctic islands, and saw all the seals with babies were all dead.
Damn.
On the beaches by drone, and that's been caused by bird flu, and that's now here in South Australia.
Far out, and we have one of the biggest seal colonies in the world as well. We've down at Kangaroo Island and Admiral's
exactly,
Arch,
and I think if there's going to be an epicenter of a crisis, it's going to be Kangaroo Island.
Far out. So obviously with all the information coming out around COVID and
Fauci's
do you mean,
when you say information, don't you mean misinformation?
Misinformation,
George?
that's right, yes.
Let's be
I guess people
precise here.
I guess people hear the bird flu thing, they get scared, like, oh no, is this COVID 2.0? Like, are the government going to use this bird flu strategy as a way to keep the good times rolling, let's just say, or bring it back maybe? Is there any threat of that? Do you think it could, it's jumped from seals, so birds from mammals, seals are mammals, humans are mammals. Are there any talk or whispers of that in terms of human threat, or?
Look, I think there was just a report of a child in Argentina in the last week or two who was seriously ill with this bird flu. But that's in the context, obviously, of many, many infected animals. There's no evidence of human-to-human transmission as such.
Yeah.
So while you'll see these occasional instances of individuals who are infected, and unfortunately a high percentage will then die from the bird flu because it's a highly lethal strain.
Oh, wow.
Fortunately, so far we haven't seen human-to-human transmission, but at any point with these wild viruses, they can mutate and become transmissible. So we know it's a probability issue here.
Yeah.
And so the probability, if there's a lot of wildlife in Australia and South Australia getting infected, the risk of a human getting infected becomes high. The people who are exposed, say, pick up a dead bird on the beach, that would be a significant risk.
Yeah.
And if that virus infected them but was also able to mutate and acquire the ability for human-to-human transmission, then all bets are off. Will that happen? Hopefully not. As I say, it hasn't happened so far in South America, where we've seen a lot of birds infected. But again, that doesn't mean it won't happen.
Yeah.
It just means it could happen, but we don't know will it happen or not. But it's a serious threat.
So for the people at home, what's the difference between the COVID virus versus the bird flu? Are they obviously influenza? Is that a style of? Is that a bacteria? Is that a virus? What is that?
Yeah, so it's a virus. So COVID is a coronavirus. So influenza is in a different family of viruses. Both infect the respiratory tract, so they're quite similar. They cause similar symptoms. I think the biggest difference is, in truth, SARS-CoV-2, which caused COVID, was and people will be shocked to hear this, it was a relatively benign virus. Unless you were very elderly or were immunosuppressed, you got sick and you recovered.
Yeah.
And so, although there was a lot of misinformation about COVID being highly lethal, that was not true. For young, healthy people, their risk of dying from COVID was less than their risk of dying in a car accident. So exceptionally low.
Yeah.
Contrast that with bird flu. So what we know about bird flu is, it's about a 50% mortality in healthy humans.
50, you said?
50.
Wow, that's not good. That's like black plague.
So, so far in the last 20 years, because bird flu has been circulating.
But 50% just in any age bracket?
Across all infections. So.
But are there different percentages for, say if I was 20 versus I was 60, so if you're 60, would that go up to like 80%?
No, so here's one of there are a few paradoxes with bird flu. If we go back to the worst ever bird flu outbreak, it was the Spanish influenza that occurred back in 1918. So it was caused Spanish influenza. People argue about what it should, what name it should be given.
Yeah.
But at the time, that's what it was caused. It caused an outbreak at the end of the Second World War. There's actually a book written by a local historian here in Adelaide describing what happened when that Spanish influenza hit Adelaide and the devastation it caused and the number of people who died from it. It's estimated to have caused 50 to 200 million deaths globally in humans.
Fire.
Right? That was a bird flu strain. So that gives you a sense of the potential impact. So the interesting thing about that is that it wasn't, unlike COVID, which picked off the very elderly people who were already sick, arguably people who were already dying of something else, and COVID tipped them over. So to a healthy person, COVID wasn't really a threat.
Yeah.
Despite what we were told. But in the case of the Spanish influenza, the majority of people who died were young, healthy adults.
Oh, so it actually was...
So it was particularly lethal in the very people where COVID isn't a threat.
It's like a paradox opposite situation.
Yeah, and there are explanations for that, because one of the reasons people die from bird flu is not just the virus, but the immune system's response to the virus is so aggressive. It's actually the immune response and the inflammation that kills you. Not necessarily the virus itself. So again, that's one. So the young, healthy people have the strongest immune systems. Normally that's a good thing. Like with COVID, that's why young, healthy people didn't get terribly sick with COVID. Paradoxically, that could be why they would be the group who would suffer most if we had a bird flu outbreak.
So I guess the question on everyone's mind then is, if bird flu becomes like a Spanish flu, we're in a pretty peculiar situation because the government trust is at all-time low. I guess Big Pharma, all-time low in trust in vaccines because of what happened with the mRNA vaccine and all the stuff coming out with Fauci. I mean, this could be a catastrophic situation, potentially, if anything goes wrong, like just say worst case scenario.
Yeah, and that's unfortunate. And again, that's why some of us pushed back against the, government misinformation that was put out during COVID, because, the consequence of governments endorsing misinformation, no matter what the motive. I mean, I'm sure the motive was good. It was people need to be protected against themselves, so we'll just stretch the truth in some cases will tell them actually something that's completely untrue, but to try and get them to behave in a particular way. Trouble is that the truth always comes out.
Yeah.
And when the truth does come out, as you say, is the public ever going to believe health departments and governments ever again? Probably not in their lifetime.
No, not at least.
And so it can take 50, it might be argued, and I would argue it isn't beneficial in the short term, that we didn't come out of the pandemic better because of the misinformation, official misinformation.
Yeah.
Because ironically, they targeted the people who were trying to put out the true information as misinformation.
Yeah.
And this, again, misinformation of misinformation. So the government ran a campaign deliberately targeting anyone who tried to actually correct the misinformation and tell the true facts as either conspiracy theorists or as people who were deliberately misinforming the public.
Yeah.
In fact, and now it's I think the evidence is out there. We've had the release, obviously, of a lot of records in the United States, official records,
so just go on
showing that there was, deliberate strategies of misinformation that were coming from official sources, from government sources. In other words, the people that who were disseminating misinformation were not the people arguing against some of these policies. It was actually the people making the policies were deliberately misinforming the public, and I don't think that's ever acceptable on any count. I think the public are entitled to the truth. Sometimes the truth may not be nice or it may be unpalatable, but I don't see any role for any government to lie to its own citizens.
So you got three camps here. You got three reasons why the pandemic and the way it went down happened, right? You got the people who think it's a grand conspiracy to depopulate the earth, right? That's one very strong theory. Two,
I'd rank that in the conspiracy theories. I'm not buying that for a minute.
A large part of the population
yes.
believes that, right? Second is just basic incompetence, scientific incompetence. Scientists got it wrong. The ones that were supposed to be in charge got it wrong, and then they.
But again, we now know what they were really thinking. So
and then what?
So we can rule that one out because in their private diaries they were recording what they really knew versus what they were telling the public.
So then the third issue is it just the issue of profit over academia and integrity of science? So
I don't think it's profit. I do think that it was misguided public health officials thinking the public wasn't, that they were smarter than the public, and therefore the public needed to be misinformed.
So it's an ego thing then? So you're telling me it's all about ego?
Yeah, a lot of it is ego. Of course, financial motives, well, you can't exclude them, but there's not a lot of direct evidence of the people who were fronting that for the health departments, whether in Australia or the US, that they were receiving bribes or kickbacks from pharmaceutical companies. Is it possible? Absolutely, but I've not seen any evidence, hard evidence of that occurring. So I am in the camp of saying I think these people were misguided, driven very much by ego and self-importance, and felt that the truth was superfluous when they were communicating to the public that their public health mission was greater than the importance of the truth.
So you're saying what you best believe from what you've witnessed is that this wasn't it wasn't a grand conspiracy to kill a lot of people. It wasn't some sort of, because I recently just said in a podcast, I made it clear that we're not having a ramping crisis, we're having a medical mRNA injury crisis. That's my opinion. Why? It's not just Australia, but worldwide, we're seeing hospitals struggling everywhere. And I think it's because one of the outcomes, I believe, from this mRNA technology being utilised as a mass medicine for a lot of people was...
Yeah, and I guess, you're connecting two dots, and I guess you're entitled to to believe that, as a scientist, our job is to say, where is there hard evidence those two dots are causally linked. They may not be, and again, I think that's the difficulty is, we're in a situation where we have unbelievably limited data to this day.
Yeah.
Because there was a deliberate policy, I think, of government and health departments to obstruct the collection of data.
Yeah.
Where the data may have, potentially, as you say, linked those dots. So as a scientist, I can't say the two dots are linked. But what concerns me is, we should know, because we should have collected data that would tell us one way or the other. But I think everyone who tried to collect such data found that they were obstructed, from many different directions coming from official sources, that they didn't want to know whether those fears were justified or unjustified, I think, and that's inexcusable in my view as a scientist.
I just think it's going to be hard for a lot of viewers to take in that the whole reason that situation happened was because of academic arrogance, you could say, almost academic ego.
Well, you live in the academic world, you'll realise that,
But it's such a weird scenario because you would think historically, yes, you've always had academic arrogance and ego, and like you've seen other scientists in the past who've been shut down because they had a different opinion. Like even the idea of sanitizing your hands was like a big deal, and
these people were largely destroyed by the scientific institution. Like some of them survived. Many of them were forced into suicide because they got so much criticism, and it was only later that it was realised, actually
he was right.
they were absolutely spot on. So you cannot underestimate academic arrogance and ego and just how big it is. I mean it's enormous. I mean that's what drives academia.
Yeah, it's like leave science out of it for a second, which might be hard for you to do, but in regards to common sense, we have this idea of common sense, morality, ontology. You can look at a situation. For example, the Labor government here won the election because they promised to fix ramping, right? That was their big promise.
They did, yeah.
That was their...
Pete Malinowskis, I do remember. That was...
Let's not forget,
that was
guys.
centre stage of his whole advertising campaign, and what's happened since? It's only ever got worse.
Exactly. So I guess my situation is, what's if the government and these egotistical academics and bureaucrats who are up there know they can't fix this ramping crisis because it's beyond just building 10 new hospitals. It's actually the fact that 95% of the population did a medical experiment that fundamentally altered their biology forever and caused huge damage across the system.
Yeah, you can say that, but again, I don't see the evidence for that. I mean, ramping, yes, it was a problem, and part of that is the demographics, the population's aging, and the population's exploded.
Yeah.
In every city of Australia. We've brought in obviously a lot more people. That creates a lot of more demand on health services that weren't built for this size of population, nor for this number of elderly people. So it's two hits. Bigger population and also a lot more people getting older.
Yeah, older population.
And that has overwhelmed the system because the system wasn't built for it, it wasn't expanded for it. If anything, they've tried to contract beds in South Australia. When they built the new Royal Adelaide Hospital, they had less beds than they had in the old hospital.
Yeah.
We have all these forces that mean that medical services cannot cope with demand. You don't need, to throw in an extra spanner.
Well, I think the reason
I think the system's broken.
Yeah, I could agree with that.
And it was already broken. Now, has the consequences of COVID, and some could argue, look, maybe the virus itself has weakened people's immune systems, and so it may have caused more load on the system. But again, I think this was, happening before COVID, and it was. If you look at the projections, it was going to get worse. And so no, I don't think we need to...
I don't think it's just more like if something happened once, then it's safe to say that, with common sense take, okay, let's just say there was some sort of evidence that unfortunately these vaccines that created cause some sort of issues. I hear stories of issues of blindness or miscarriage or the idea of turbo cancers, all these things, right? Even if one of those things is true, even remotely true, then that should be like, okay, there's a doorway there to look into this with thorough investigation, a royal commission, get academics involved, and even if it's a 10% increase in, let's say, damage to human society, then that's worth taking a look at.
Oh, no, look, I mean, that's a totally different point. As I say, I don't think the hospital ramping crisis in South Australia, I've not seen, it's happening, it's getting worse. But what I'm saying is that was happening before COVID. Yeah. And it's just, I think it's just complete failure of our health department and our government. Yeah. They just not very smart. They haven't built a health system that's resilient and expandable to cope with demand. Yeah. And that's a purely political problem. If we look at health concerns of vaccines and what research needs to be done, and are people entitled to more research on the safety aspect? Absolutely. Yeah. If the health department are going to get up and front the cameras and say, I can guarantee, hand on my heart, this vaccine's 100% safe. It doesn't cause cancer. It doesn't cause this. Show us the data, for God's sake. Yeah. Otherwise, it's just your belief. Yeah. And maybe it's just a reflection of your egomania of your, public health officials fronting the camera. Yeah. And unfortunately, I think that we now know from, certainly from Tony Fauci's diaries. Yeah, what do we actually get? That's exactly what we're faced with. Yeah. So what do we actually find out from the diaries? Like, can you give us a bit of a breakdown on what was new for you, or things that you already kind of knew and were kind of verified through the diary entries, or what were your biggest revelations from the whole thing? Well, I mean, it wasn't a revelation, I guess, for me, because I knew that the concerns that I had about, a new technology being rolled out prematurely with next to no data, right? There's massive concerns, as that any medical person, or certainly any vaccine developer, would have. And I knew my fellow vaccine developers, shared those concerns that I had, that, what are we going to do here? This has not had normal testing. And yet, we had health officials like Tony Fauci getting up, this has been extensively tested, there is absolutely no concerns about safety. That's all been ruled out. I didn't believe that to be true, and I knew that everyone else I spoke to privately didn't believe that to be true. So was he really, did he have access to data I didn't have? Possibly, because, he was in communication with Pfizer, and so maybe there was secret, but if so, why wouldn't they share that data, showing that... To the academic world at least. Yeah, but as far as we were aware, and there was no such data, and therefore either, he was speaking, he was deluded, and, or he was deliberately misinforming. Yeah. And so what we now know, because his personal diaries have been now released, against his will, obviously, by US Congress, is that in his personal diaries he was recording all the concerns that we were having. What do we do? Could mRNA vaccines be causing miscarriages? This is a big concern. And then the next day he was fronting the press and saying there's absolutely no concerns. Yeah. Wow. So what it meant was, what we were thinking was what he was thinking privately, but publicly he was saying something completely the opposite. And similarly, we had, John Skerritt, the head of the TGA, doing the same. We had Brendan Murphy, the head of the Federal Health Department. So so they were choosing to say one thing to the public while, like the rest of us, sharing all the same private concerns.
Yeah.
So in other words, no, there wasn't any evidence proving safety, or there wasn't anything that they had access to that we didn't.
Yeah, it's strange.
So in other words, the science wasn't established.
Yeah.
But they were telling the public it was.
Yeah.
I mean, I was even in court cases where Australian, vaccine experts were testifying to the judge that, there was absolute evidence of safety of these vaccines, repeating what Tony Fauci was saying publicly.
So just for people at home, was Tony Fauci the main head honcho of this entire operation? Was he the guy that everyone fell back to? All the health bureaucrats here in Australia, all the health bureaucrats in New Zealand and other countries, were they relying on Tony Fauci's words to give reliable understanding to the public?
Yeah, and I think that's the problem.
Yeah.
That it does ultimately come down to that he was the most senior health honcho globally, and he was in front of the press every day.
Yeah.
Speaking with enormous confidence. He had all the resources of the NIH behind him, obviously. And so he became the global figurehead of, the mRNA vaccines and all things related to that, in terms of all science related to that. And he spoke with such authority. But we now know behind that were all his private fears and concerns, and the lack of evidence. The answer is that he was speaking with an authority that wasn't backed by any evidence.
Yeah. Wow.
You know what I mean?
Yeah. I guess.
And to what and then everyone, So yes, I'm sure if you ask Brendan Murphy, he would say I was taking my lead from Tony Fauci.
So it's all handballing responsibility to Fauci instead now.
Yeah.
Because it's just quite sad that we have a system now that doesn't have its own merit. It doesn't have its own ability to critically think about its own decisions. We have to just rely on Fauci. My next question is, okay, this is America, right? America, is supposed to be the head of the Western world, and they kind of give out their orders to other Western countries. What about places like China, Asia, Southeast Asia, Korea, places like the Middle East? What was their perspective around the usage of mRNA technology? Were they for or against it? Like Russia, what about those parts of the world? Because you don't really get to hear much from what those...
Well, obviously, most of those countries didn't have mRNA. It wasn't a developed technology at the time, so they didn't use it. So no one in China, or I've spoken to a few people, if they travelled or were like a student in the US, they got mRNA as it was rolled out, but the China itself didn't.
So what were they using then, or were they?
So they were using locally developed inactivated viral vaccines.
Also,
so very safe.
Yeah,
very just like the flu vaccine.
Yeah,
maybe not. And we could have extensive arguments about effectiveness, but if you're arguing safety, it was rock solid. These vaccines were incredibly safe.
Yeah.
If you had an argument, it would be just, well, how effective were they? And I think there you have to be careful, because there were no real placebo-controlled studies where they directly compared like an inactivated vaccine with mRNA and looked at outcomes. So of course the West saw their job, and we now know it was deliberate, because the US military complex drove the mRNA rollout. So it's sort of very complementary technology to what they want to use in soldiers. And they were tasked, like the head of the military was tasked to run Warp Speed, which was the program that by which Trump drove. So you had the US military behind it. And they had official campaigns, social media campaigns, run by the Pentagon, which is now been revealed under freedom of information, whose job was to undermine and criticise and degrade the vaccines being developed by China and Russia and other countries.
Cuba, we had Cuba as well.
Yeah, but the Pentagon was deliberately putting out misinformation through social media networks
Propaganda against
propaganda
their
to criticise and diminish the vaccines being used by other countries in order to elevate the importance and strength of mRNA. So when I say I find it, if you look with the benefit of hindsight and say, well, how effective were, say, mRNA vaccines compared to other vaccines, I don't think you can believe a word that's written out there, unfortunately, because it's all biased.
Well, it's the fog of war, really, isn't it?
And so I would say the only real way to measure the strength of the vaccines is, all right, so if mRNA is meant to prevent infection, all right, find me a person on the planet who's had an mRNA vaccine for COVID who hasn't had COVID. Guess what? There isn't anyone. There's no person on the planet who's had mRNA vaccines against COVID who hasn't subsequently got COVID.
Wow.
There's so much data that irrefutably shows that. And if you talk to people who've had mRNA, some of them have had 6, 8, 10 shots, and they'll say, oh, I've had COVID 3 or 4 times, all documented, confirmed by PCR or by rat testing. So we're not talking here of getting the flu after a COVID shot, which obviously doesn't protect against. This is having as many COVID mRNA shots as you like and still getting a confirmed infection. So it had zero effectiveness against COVID, in truth, right? But we were being told 95% effective in preventing COVID, right?
Yeah.
Because that was measured over 4 weeks.
Far out.
Right? That was the phase 3 trial data, which was terminated prematurely because after 4 weeks they could show an effect, and that was where the 95% claim. The true claim should be 0.
Far out.
Because in truth, everyone who's had an mRNA vaccine has had COVID subsequently. So in other words, its effectiveness against preventing infection was 0. You see the problem. Yeah. But they'll say, oh, but look, there's papers in the New England Journal, showing 95%. The TGA, under Skerritt was still claiming years later, these are the most amazing vaccines because they're 95% effective. Complete misinformation. Because the only way to measure vaccine effectiveness is to see over time, does someone get infected or not?
Yeah.
And if you only follow for 4 weeks after having a shot, is that mean anything? Of course not. It's like if I protected you against bird flu and then, after 4 weeks and said, okay, and then you die from bird flu in 8 weeks' time, say, sorry, it was outside the effectiveness window that we were measuring. So that's just bad luck. So everyone now just dies 4 weeks later, but they're all going to still die. I mean, are you going to take that vaccine? Of course not.
It's an absolute disgrace.
So again, everything that happened during COVID was just, it was just all pure misinformation. Trying to find any truth in that, even for people like me who are looking for it, is next to impossible. Because it's like propaganda. It's everywhere, it's at every level, it's in the science, it's in the public health statements. All of it is just complete misinformation. Yeah. And, where's the truth?
Yeah. No.
And that's the antithesis of science, interestingly, because science is meant to be all about truth, and only about truth.
Yeah.
And yet during COVID, it was impossible to actually find the truth. And only now, 7 years later, even in terms of what was Fauci thinking and what was his real thoughts about, the risks of the vaccines versus what he was telling the public, we now know they were 2 totally different things.
Yeah.
I think that's the importance of his personal diaries.
Wow.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
and I bet you if you look at the personal diaries of Brendan Murphy or all of these people, I suspect you would find exactly the same thing, that what they were telling the public, may have no bearing on actually what they were thinking, and knew the scientific evidence to be at the time they were saying those things. And that's a big concern.
Well, it's a big concern because, I guess our population here in Australia has kind of been very nonchalant about the consequences of it all. in regards to the mandates, lockdowns, what it meant for small business, what it means for the economy, what it meant for regulation, the over-regulation of government, the over-regulation of the health system, the over-regulation of every single sector of Australian economy. Like, there is consequences to this beyond just the health of an individual. There's actual economic consequences to this, schooling consequences, educational consequences, the way we now operate as workers. Like, now we've got people work at home now. So like, it's kind of shifted the entire culture of Australia and the world. And it's kind of like another 9/11 moment. 9/11, pre-9/11, you had a bit more freedom, and there wasn't these civil liberty issues, and you weren't getting digitally surveilled by the government. You could go on a plane, smoke a cigarette, have some fun, you get your luggage in there. After 9/11, the whole thing changed. Everything was being surveyed, the whole system changed, the airports changed. And I feel like COVID was another example of that, where it was like a scenario where the government could then increase and get their grips on their over-regulation, their over-censorship. We just saw the ASIO bill pass this week. I'm not sure if you've seen that.
No,
also, ASIO have just passed a bill.
Right.
Well, the federal parliament just passed a bill that gives ASIO the powers to basically take you, Nikolai, if they want to, with no reason, put you into a prison cell, give you an interrogation, and up to young as 14 years old, by the way. So they can take 14-year-olds away, interrogate you, and then you're not allowed to have a lawyer present. You have to give them information, and if you refuse, they can jail you. And if you tell anyone, they can also jail you up to 5 years as well. That's the level of power the government have now in this country. That's just happened this week.
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone recognises that, governments need certain powers to deal with, I guess, major threats.
Yeah.
And we all accept that's a balancing act.
Yeah.
I think what we appreciate post-COVID is that those powers can be completely abused if, that central cohort, in this case, the Department of Health, Brendan Murphy and his other colleagues, and a few politicians, I think at the time, Scott Morrison and the state premiers and health ministers collectively agreed that there were no limits on what they could do to the Australian population. I mean, that is terrifying.
Yeah, it was.
Because you have a group of 20, at most 30 people in Australia, basically putting the whole Australian population into prison for as long as they wanted, with no scientific justification and with no accountability.
No consequences.
And no consequences.
Yeah, besides karma.
And, I don't think most people to this day, I don't think have woken up what that means.
Yeah, well, I'm not sure if you watched
what I mean?
I had David Spears on recently, and obviously, he's been through a bit of hell right now, but it was actually positive to hear on my interview he released, and I think this is the first time in the history of Australia where we had a member that was in power, he was a minister at the time, actually reveal that they made huge errors during the pandemic, and he kind of regrets the lockdowns and the way he handled it. So that was interesting to hear. I'm not sure if you heard that before.
No, I think there have been some honest politicians in Australia. I mean, unfortunately, not many, but who have come out and at least admitted, they got it wrong. But what they haven't admitted is that there was no counterbalancing system. There was no accountability. And critics, and I guess somehow I got, labelled as one of those just because I appeared in a few court actions as an expert, trying to say what the evidence really was, as opposed to the misinformation that the government were putting out, and the government experts were disseminating complete misinformation.
Yeah.
And so we all got silenced and had our careers and reputations destroyed to neutralise us, which meant there wasn't even a public counter voice.
Yeah.
Because that was taken away.
Let alone, did we have that in the past? Like, have there been other events in human history where there were scientific counterpoints to, I don't know,
to everything,
like Oppenheimer, for example?
Yeah, well, like nuclear energy, absolutely. There's always been, and I guess that's what keeps society balanced. Is always having an opposition, always having someone who can criticise. But if you ever end up with a situation where both major parties, Liberal and Labor, get together and say, we are going to act as one force and we're going to silence every other critic, right? You're in a dictatorship, and suddenly all your systems fail. Like what you think are counterbalancing systems turn out to be completely ineffectual. The courts in Australia, completely ineffectual, completely politicised.
Yeah.
Because both major parties, if one party had said, no, this is wrong, the mandates are wrong and everything, so say the Liberal National Party, I don't know they exist anymore, but, back then they obviously did. They were actually in government, right, or Labor. But if one of those had got up strongly and argued this is wrong, right, the court system might have worked.
Yeah.
Because the judges would have recognised, there's two forces at play here, we better be careful. But they were told by both sides, you do whatever you have to enforce the mandates and to enforce this. And so they just ruled accordingly. They didn't think, they just did what they were told.
I guess that was the rise of the uni-party idea as well then.
Yeah.
You only had maybe one senator, Senator Alexander,
no, exactly.
show some sort of resistance, and that was it, really?
Which was token,
the rest of his party.
And obviously, and so this uni-party, I think that's, you could argue One Nation is, its rise in support is really a recognition of what you're calling, I think is a good description, the uni-party, where during the pandemic, Labor and Liberals and National Party were all on one page, and that was, let's, use every power and force we have to make people, compel people to do what we want, regardless of the science. Because science wasn't important here. It was about compelling people to behave in ways the government wanted. And of course, once they saw that work, there's no limits to what.
Yeah, well, now we're seeing it everywhere.
When they say jump, George, you better jump.
Wow.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or suffer the consequences, because we're a totalitarian system now.
Yeah.
The Labor, Liberal, National Party, Uni Party, we're the bosses and you're the servants, and we tell you to jump, you better jump.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you'll suffer the full consequences.
I was never very good at jumping. Sorry, guys.
but
I guess my question for you then on that: do you regret what you did? Do you regret coming out so strongly against the system, or do you wish? Is there any hindsight?
Oh, look,
for you?
I've suffered a lot. I mean, my vaccine company, has been brutalised by South Australia, and obviously close to destroyed. I mean, we're still holding pieces together, but so the consequences of speaking the truth are pretty dire, I've learned. When you're faced with a totalitarian system where there's no counterbalancing system that sort of looks after you, so you're on your own. And that was my experience, that I thought it was just the right thing to do to
what was the driving force
offer
of that?
To be an expert. And
well, why do you have that mindset? Why did you as a scientist decide, I'm going to stand on my values and face this tsunami wave of brutality?
Well, because I guess I'm a doctor. I come from a very medical family. My father was a doctor during the a prisoner of war during the Second World War. But he impressed upon me I guess that the importance of being honest and doing the right thing. And the consequences are not something that you can morally factor in.
Yeah.
So
So it's a sense of regardless the truth and science are more important than the consequences that may follow if you tell the truth.
Yeah.
Okay.
And maybe if you if you thought through the consequences or realised the consequences, would you still do it is always the question.
Yeah.
I think your person, or you're either a strong person or a weak person.
Yeah.
So you would still have done it.
You still do it? You wouldn't take it back? What happened?
No, but in doing it, you would be, like bracing for, what
Impact.
you knew was coming.
Yeah.
I know my father, in his prisoner of war camp days, was arguing with a Japanese officer over need for medicines for his dying patients, and knowing that the consequence of questioning a Japanese officer was immediate execution, and was accepted that as so he was actually told to kneel, and the guy was lining up the sword, and
Wow.
some junior officers, seeing this, knowing how important my father was to the operation of the camp, actually went and just found a more senior camp commandant in time to get him to come and actually order the officer to cease the execution.
Wow.
But he was comfortable with that.
So your father was ready to die for the truth.
Yeah.
And he told you these stories when you were younger, and that kind of instilled into you. And
and so look, it doesn't mean you enjoy
was your
the
father
consequences or that you're looking forward to them. It's just you can't avoid them. You can't separate. If you're a person of integrity, the consequences can't change your integrity. So you have to make the same decision.
Well, this would be very hard for a lot of people to hear, especially my more secular audience. But I guess my question, because obviously being part of Turning Point, Charlie Kirk, right? Important factor was your father. Was he a spiritual man by any sense of the way? Like, what would compel such an act to literally be killed by a sword, to die by the sword? It's a pretty sacrificial thing, and not many people would.
Yeah, he was intensely Christian.
Okay.
So he carried a Bible with him, which we still have. It's falling apart.
Oh wow!
During his whole prisoner of war
wow! So
days. No, he read it every day, and
wow.
So he was extremely religious, and arguably it's his faith and his religion that made him survive. Because obviously 90% of the prisoners of war, who were with him didn't survive.
Yeah, I guess the reason I'm...
But he would argue his faith and his belief that, everything, if you did the right thing, I guess...
You're living closer to theosis, closer to what
Well,
Christ
if
is.
you died with a clear conscience and a clear heart, and that was more important than doing the wrong thing and being a weak, selfish person and surviving with the guilt of that you've let other people die, and so you've sacrificed others for your own survival. His argument was, if I did that, I wouldn't be able to live with it.
Yeah.
So I prefer to die for the right cause than to survive having compromised my principles, and I get that.
Yeah.
I mean, because...
the reason I'm asking, because I'm reading a book I was reading a book called Salt of the Earth, which was about a famous Russian physicist who was a very orthodox Christian man, to the point where he became a monk.
Yeah.
But he was an absolute genius. This guy was responsible for some of the most advanced... I think he helped build the technology that enable computers. I forget his name, it slips my mind. I will get it up potentially on the screen here. But he was extremely intelligent, absolute genius, but a very staunch Orthodox Christian. And the entire scientific creed he had was the battle between I want to be a monk versus I want to be a scientist. And the monks of the Russian church were like, hey man, we acknowledge your gifts as a genius. Go be a scientist, go do it. This is what your purpose is. And that was very hard for him. So he went back and forth between being an academic, being a scientist, but then also going back to monastic way of a life and moving back to monasticism. But it's a fascinating story. So I was just curious because you're not going to hear just people willing to give their lives up for nothing. There has to be something powerful there, something stronger. And I'm glad that you revealed that, because a lot of people are afraid to mention that. I love Jordan Peterson, but he seems to have this weird habit of not wanting to go the extra level and go, he doesn't want to associate with Christianity because he feels like as a it will deter from his science. But I just don't adamantly agree
No,
with
I
that.
don't.
I mean, it's very,
Again, I think you can be a great scientist and still be a Christian or have belief in a religion.
Yeah, Albert Einstein was.
I similarly, when I was young, I thought that science and religion are because I was looking at religion in a different way. I was looking at it from a factual way,
like an industrial way.
Well, like, dissecting out, all these miracles and everything. Were they really miracles?
Yeah, Noah's Ark.
Were saints, did these things happen, as described? But I missed the point that is not religion. That's just a whole collection of facts.
Yeah.
Just like science isn't a whole collection of facts. It's the theorems and the equations that hold the whole world together. You know what I mean? Like, the individual facts really don't matter so much as the equations, like E equals MC squared.
Yeah.
And religion is the same. That what you see in the Bible or the Quran is just a whole lot of ideas and facts. But that isn't the religion. The religion is the faith and the belief in a higher power.
Like the embodiment of it all.
And you don't have to believe all of those facts, because I don't think even the people who wrote those facts down didn't write them down as facts. They wrote them down as ideas, as guiding principles, as examples and metaphors.
Yeah.
And so if you take too literal an approach to it, then you'll miss the whole point.
Well, that was me. My child I took everything so literal. Like, I just couldn't fathom, like, what...
No, I think we all went through that, as I say. I was the same.
Like, I couldn't fathom the idea of Noah's Ark. I thought that was the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. Like, how could you put all of humanity, the Earth's animals...
Well, maybe it was just a regional issue, flood, and he saved the local farm
but luckily
animals.
we have people like, Graham Hancock, who's, the Eric Dyson period, and as I got into I've got a science background as well. I got a degree in mineral geoscience. I learned about, global changes, and I learned that, we have rising sea levels depending on the glaciers, and I was like, okay, that makes sense now. So
there were big floods through there, and you think if someone was smart enough to build a boat and get a few animals, and all the other, farms and animals were all drowned, I mean, he would be regarded as a saviour, and the example of every animal probably meant, some cows and sheep, but they are really important to re-establish local farming. Yeah. Do you know what I mean?
So he's a hero. It's like a myth.
He's a hero.
Yeah.
And
and when you're a hero, you get songs written about you, and you get...
but also, it becomes a metaphor of forward planning, and people who, work towards the future are not appreciated in the current present. In fact, we prepare for pandemics means that, while there's no pandemic, people sort of would say, oh, why, what are you doing? Like, you're wasting your time. You should be doing something more important. Yeah. But, the reason we've been working on bird flu for 20 years is for the very reason we're seeing the outbreak now.
So you guys are all vaccine developers, or by any sort of science... you guys are like little Noahs, but building little arks, waiting for the great flood to come.
Well, certainly when you're doing pandemics, because they don't happen every year. If you're doing, seasonal flu vaccines, well, it's going to probably be directly relevant. But some people say, pandemics aren't that bad. We saw COVID, and unfortunately,
that's like a little tidal wave.
They've got, not even that.
Yeah,
COVID
little splash.
Was a little splash in a puddle.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it was magnified by the media and by public health people who were trying to scare everyone.
Yeah.
And but it just wasn't true.
Well, we were told that this was a 2004 Indonesian tsunami event, and in reality, it was as you said, a splash. So hindsight is a lovely thing, but
inevitably, as I say, there will be future pandemics, and
so how do you reinforce?
And there may be a catastrophic pandemic, and again, I can't tell you what the probability of another Spanish flu is. It's not zero. It's not 100%. It's but even if it was 10%. The fact I might have a vaccine, and we do. We've just had our bird flu vaccine tested in the US. We've just got the results back, complete protection. We could be rolling it out here in South Australia as we speak. The only problem Pete Malinowskis and the Labor government here. That is the only thing stopping it.
The uni party back again.
You know, as it was during COVID,
which was the Liberal government.
With our COVID vaccine then, and the logic behind it, I think just super big egos.
Yeah,
they cannot accept that someone local might actually be able to deliver a solution. They'd prefer to pay Pfizer $100 billion.
Yeah.
You know, for an overseas vaccine than to actually admit that there's someone out there in Australia who can actually do the job, and it's not them.
Yeah.
Because they aren't the ones supporting it. Do you know what I mean? Like, well, and that is, you know, yeah. I mean, Pete Malinowskis' ego wouldn't fit into this room. I mean, let's be honest.
Well, the problem with the Premier is not just his ego, it's also the fact that anyone that's in leadership has to answer to, you know, NGOs. The Premier just got back from the US, you know, he's constantly communicating with big businesses. So, I mean, there's a level of, we got to associate with the big business, the Pfizers of this world.
Yeah.
The big foods, this Nestle's of this world, like the big companies, they get first priority, and all the little guys kind of like whatever.
No, and I think if you talk to any small business in Australia, they all say the same thing. Like, you know, what the hell is the Australian government doing? It will back big overseas businesses at the expense of local small businesses. And how are local small businesses meant to become, you know, big and global when we don't even have the support of our own local government?
Yeah.
You know, like and it's destroying Australia's economy.
Yep.
Because it means that we're more and more reliant on overseas products, including vaccines and medicines, rather than developing our own. We're dependent on overseas cars and all our manufacturing, right? And eventually the Australian economy is just going to collapse under its own weight, because they've made us completely dependent on things coming from outside, and the only thing we export is dirt.
Well, yeah, and our banking systems, right? We're a banking resource economy, and I'm not sure if you know this, but Australia's economy has the same economic diversity as South Africa and Mongolia. That's how bad our economy is.
Yeah, it ranks right at the lowest level of complexity of the world economy. I mean,
it's actually it's an absolute disgusting shame that we have this situation, and also. I was talking about you before off camera about the superannuation, even superannuation itself. You know, we give our money, 12% of our income, to then prop up only 200 of Australia's companies. Leaves out all the other companies that are just sitting there going, what about us? To have a successful business here that goes global or national it's a miracle.
Yeah,
it wasn't a miracle 50 years ago, but you know, you're a young person who wants to start a business to be an entrepreneur in Australia. You can't. You have to leave this country. Realistically, you have to go to America, where you have the Magnificent Seven, and then you have not just the Magnificent Seven, but then you have opportunity, like the land of opportunity.
Well, you got venture capital. I mean, who can write a check for $1 billion? You know, here you ask for 100,000 and you won't get it.
We know that. Even in politics, like, you know. Right now, third-party organisations are going to be like the most important factor in elections coming forward, and because money is so tight, because people are so struggling, there's hardly any money to support third-party organisations to actually make a difference. And the way the Premier has developed this new system where your votes is what gets you your money, well, what is that now? We've got a sort of system where, you know, only the two parties will essentially get most money. We were lucky this time that One Nation did so well, so they get a big substantial amount of money from the votes. But, you know, I think the Liberal Party was sitting there licking their lips going, oh, it doesn't matter, like, we'll come back eventually as this phoenix. But
no, because if they haven't got the money,
well, I don't think they will. They might go broke by then. You know?
And then in that case they fold as a party. Because as we know, it's all social media time buying advertising dollars. And if you don't have the money for that, you know, forget your chances as being a major party. So as you say, it has become a very circular system. But you know, that's not my problem. I guess my problem right now is what to do about this bird flu pandemic.
So you're seriously concerned? You think this needs the highest level of attention? Like, if you could sit in front of the Premier right now, would you say, hey mate, we've got a serious problem here?
Absolutely. I mean, it's like the algal bloom, which they tried to
they covered
play
that up
down,
as well, apparently, allegedly.
But unfortunately, it seems to have sorted itself out. They haven't fixed it. and it will probably come back again in a few years. But but unfortunately, no. That's there seems to be their approach to every crisis. First, play it down and pretend it's not happening, and then when it's completely out of control, then sort of try and distract, and say, oh, we'll get a vaccine from outside or from somewhere else, or rather than planning for disasters like this, which was inevitable because the birds migrate to Australia who bring the bird flu, just as they migrate to South America. And so it was just a matter of time before it came here.
Yeah.
And once it's here, it will be like in South America. It will get into poultry flocks. It will wipe them out. Which will mean that eggs will be in extremely short supply and egg prices will go up, which will drive inflation even more. And it may get into our native animal populations. We have no idea, and we've been doing research on this since the start of COVID, is how susceptible are koalas to bird flu?
Yeah.
No one's ever tested it, right?
Yeah.
Now, it might get into the koala population and kill every koala in Australia.
Yeah. Poor koalas.
No, but, or it could be the kangaroos, or because, Australian marsupials, right, are completely in a class of their own as mammals. Yeah. There's no vaccines for them, there's no knowledge of their immune systems, almost minimal research has been done on them.
Yeah.
And yet we have here this wave that we know is now going to come and cross and disseminate throughout the whole of Australia, right? We're only seeing the start of a massive outbreak, and it won't stay in the birds. We know that it's already in the penguins. It's in the seals, right? But what happens if it gets into marsupials? It could wipe out every marsupial in Australia if they turn out to be particularly susceptible.
Yeah, far out.
And, are we being supported to do the marsupial research and try and understand and develop the vaccine? No. Yeah. Not only are we getting zero support, we're getting negative support. They're trying to drive us out of here.
Yeah, it's
they don't want us in Australia is the answer, because they don't want, again, anyone who dares to speak the truth. That's nothing more toxic to, I would argue, particularly a Labor government, than anyone who speaks the truth. Well, because they live off misinformation. That's the whole principle of socialism, to be honest. Because if they told people truly, we're just going to make you all poorer and you'll all be equally poor, would you vote for such a government? Yeah. But that is the principle of socialism, right? It's not about making the poor rich. It's about making the rich poor. And then, in general terms, just spraying all that money into useless causes and wasting it all, so that ultimately, as we've seen in Australia, the per capita GDP is at record lows.
Wow.
Heading downwards.
Fine.
Australians are all getting poorer.
And we could lose our damn
which
koalas.
we can thank to a socialist government, because that's the only explanation.
In my opinion, the ASIO bill, to me, is a nail in the coffin. I reckon the fact that they can just take away your child, your wife, whatever they want, without any... They don't need any evidence they can just come get you. I think that's an absolute... Even human rights lawyers saying this is an absolute disgusting usage of power.
Well, again, if
I get the whole idea,
if it's constrained and it truly is targeted terrorism, but the point is, when you have those powers and they're unfettered and you don't trust any of the people enforcing the system, and I certainly don't.
I don't trust them.
Having watched them during the pandemic, I don't trust a single one of them. Then you've given them unlimited powers with no accountability and no system of control. You're inviting Stalinist Russia to come and operate in Australian society. I think anyone who'd lived under those types of regimes, and we do have obviously people who grew up in Eastern Europe and under the old USSR, I don't think any of them want to go back to living in such a system. Yeah. And yet that's what we're inviting in Australia right now under the current government. That's the sad truth.
So Nikolai, before I let you go, obviously your time is running short here and I really appreciate you being here. Is there anything that you think is, obviously the bird flu is such a huge significant issue for you and what you think is important to South Australia right now? And you could argue that this would be worse than even the marine crisis, which has killed most of the fish. How serious is this issue? Like, what is your message to the government now or to the Premier?
We have a vaccine. It's been proved to be effective in the US, so it's been tested in animal models, completely protects against this particular bird flu.
Is that
not
for
some
humans
vaccine they're using which probably protects against a different bird flu, but they're just going to...
Just to be clear, is this vaccine for humans or for animals? Like,
it's for both.
Oh, okay, so if it has the same, so you can inject the birds and they would get a resistance or
yeah, exactly.
to this. Okay,
and then the penguins, like again, birds, there are a lot of them.
Yeah.
But there are some birds and some animals that are perhaps more precious than others.
Yeah.
For instance, the penguins, you could easily go in and vaccinate.
Well, they can't fly, right?
Well,
so you can,
they're easy to round up and vaccinate. And you vaccinate 100,000 penguins, you save your native penguin population. So it can be targeted.
Yeah.
And we have a vaccine ready to roll out.
Yeah.
It's there. It's sitting here in South Australia, waiting to be used. If the government
Come
would
get it,
actually,
government. What are you waiting for?
if Peter Malinowskis knew how to pick up a phone and actually use it, we're ready to help. We don't want anything for it. We'll roll it out for free. We did that during COVID. We gave our vaccine to every zoo in Australia. So you go and see a tiger at Monarto or a leopard.
Did they use those vaccines?
Yeah, our vaccine was used in all of the zoos in Australia.
Oh wow!
Right,
I didn't know that.
You go to Taronga Zoo and ask to see all their big tigers. They've all had our Spikogen vaccine,
Damn.
all completely protected.
I had no idea. That would have been great PR. Was it like supposed to be hush hush?
No. Again,
Nikolai, why didn't you tell me? You should have told me this earlier.
Well, like again, we were trying to put out these stories. We gave it free. We continue. In fact, the zoos continue to use our COVID vaccine. So we get requests and we don't charge anything for it.
Oh wow!
So we do this all because we think it's the right thing to do.
Yeah.
But so every tiger and lion in Australia and every chimpanzee, has had a COVID vaccine, and we're ready to do the same with bird flu.
Yeah.
We have the vaccine. We're ready to provide it to every zoo for free.
Yeah.
Right? Who does that?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, certainly, Pfizer and mRNA, they'd be charging you for it, which makes you doubt whether, is it safe and is it effective? When you're giving it away for free, like, there's no benefit to us, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Other than we protect our population here and, particularly our animal population and the vulnerable ones, and potentially the human population. And wouldn't that be great?
Yeah.
To have South Australia actually be the first in the world to have an effective bird flu vaccine for both its animals and its humans. And it's here and it's ready. Yeah. I mean, we've been told by, an ex-Liberal minister during the pandemic that that's what he was told by the health department were doing wrong. We weren't paying off enough Liberal politicians in Canberra.
Well, that's why we're seeing the resurgence of the Australian First movement, this idea that if we're going to have lobbying, it needs to be Australia first, it needs to be of the interest of Australians, and it needs to be the interest of the nation. We have too many foreign lobby groups from every single nation, from America to Israel, China, India. Every single foreign country has their sticky fingers in our country, but not our own people. And that's why I'm very happy to see a group like the Australian Lobby Group manifest out of this situation, obviously the immigration crisis, that we're calling the immigration crisis, where the government are using immigration as a way to cover up their false economy and flood the country full of immigrants just because it's the only way they can actually prop up this economy right now.
Get rid of the criminal sector of the economy. They actually actively grow it, the politicians, because that increases their funding. I think we're seeing the same thing evolve in Australia. And
it's quite sad.
It is very sad.
Look, on that note, I'm going to leave you to it, but thank you again for coming on. It's been an absolute pleasure. And the best way they can find you, Nikolai, is through LinkedIn, I'm assuming. Is LinkedIn
depends who's trying to find me, like after what we've just discussed, there might be a few lobbyists out there
they might.
worried about their
There's LinkedIn.
illegal...
Is that your best platform? Nikolai, is it just Nikolai Petrovsky? What's the handle for everyone at home?
I'm not savvy with social media, so I don't think I have a handle.
I think it's, are you Nick Petrovsky on the LinkedIn?
Nikolai Petrovsky.
Look, we'll find it. I'll put it here. But everyone, thank you again for joining me, and thank you, Nikolai, again for. I'll shake your hand because I always do that. Thank you again for coming back, and yeah, for everyone at home, make sure you like, subscribe. If you enjoyed that conversation, you want Nikolai back to drop some more hard truths about what's happening in his world, and also, you know, maybe we'll do a bird flu update soon and figure out how many birds we've got going. Luckily for us, all the fish are dead, so it doesn't matter. The fish aren't going to get affected, but. Maybe we don't want to lose our birds as well. Imagine that. No fish and no birds. God damn.
And no penguins.
And no
or
penguins.
Seals.
Or seals. There we go. We've lost every single animal there. It might just be dust out there in South Australia. By the way we're going. So, yeah, anyways, thank you again. God bless you all, and we'll talk soon. Thanks, guys.